happy to having you here with us in this interesting podcast about growth hacking for startups and interesting things. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here too.
Can you tell us about yourself, about your company in a few words?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a go-to-market and customer acquisition hacker. I'm formerly a proper computer hacker from Unit 8200, which is the Israeli NSA, and later a startup founder. I raised $3 million from Y Combinator and other investors back in 2016.
Wow.
And drove my previous startup to profitability and revenues of approximately $2 million per year. And today I specialize in getting startups from zero to their first hundreds of customers using clever automation and guerrilla tactics, and also my experience from getting products to from zero to one. I wouldn't necessarily call it like all the way to product market fit, but definitely to repeatable sales.
Amazing. Wow. I would love to know your experience from Y Combinator. I'm watching their videos, so it's very interesting.
Yeah, their videos are great. The reason, by the way, that I didn't say product market fit is because product market fit also has a lot to do with the product. I usually only deal with like the go-to-market side of things. But I definitely think, by the way, and that's also something that I learned from my previous company, that when you have a lot of customer conversation, when I help companies drive customer conversations, to have like constant customer conversations with a lot of customers, that also gives the product a much better roadmap to advance and a much better precision, and that also helps them get to where they need to be faster and better.
Amazing. Can you share with us a few growth hacking tips or methods for startup, and maybe to highlight the craziest one you ever had, or it's super interesting. Yeah, also for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, it's interesting because let's start by like classifying what growth hackers can fall into. They usually fall into like three distinct professions. The first one is like a viral influencer, social media marketing. The second one is like it has more to do with like growth, with increasing the metrics of like later stage companies throughout the whole like pirate metrics, acquisition, activation, return, revenue retention, etc. So that's like growth hacking in the sense of like making the KPIs go up. And the third one is like what I do is like go to market is like this 0 to 1 or 0 to X, which is where you have to like figure out the initial target audience, messaging, distribution, how you get to your first X customers. So I actually have good examples for each of these steps. Which one do you want to hear?
The last one, actually.
The last one, okay.
Yeah, from 0 to X, yeah.
So from 0 to X, okay. So there's one like really well-known example from Airbnb. I can talk about that, and then I can also give you some examples from myself. But with Airbnb, they realized that people were like posting their places for short-term rentals on Craigslist. And how they got from like their 0 to 1 is that they figured out this particular use case, and they scraped all of the posts from Craigslist, and they approached each one of those persons who posted and told them, hey, come over to Airbnb. It's a better platform for your specific use case. So that's, one of the tactics is to latch on to an existing audience, to like steal from other like places where these people are hanging out, but are not ideal for them. So this is one example. Another example, kind of along the lines of what I sometimes do, is if there's like a very specific and evident use case, then one of the things that you can do is find posts on LinkedIn or on other networks that mention a specific problem or a specific keyword, scrape all of those posts, and you can do that with either Octoparse or build your own scraper or use tools like Phantom Buster or something like that. Not all the time it's going to be the same. But when you scrape all of these posts and all of these comments, you actually can get to a pretty wide audience of people who care very, very specifically about a particular problem that you know how to solve. And that's beside, the standard, let's scrape other websites that have like inferior tech than 2 hours.
I'm going to use it. Let me write it down. I'm going to use it.
Like option number one is like steal your audience from places where they're currently at, but are not as good for their use case as you are. Option number two is interesting, is where, this is an idea that Uber did. They famously exploited a situation that's called excess demand. So how did they do that? they found times where customers literally had like no other transportation option except for Uber. So this is like situations where it's the end of a ball game and there's like 70,000 people coming out of the stadium and all the taxis are taken. So if you want to get a taxi, you literally have no other option other than Uber. So that's exactly the place where they would advertise, because they knew that there were lots of people there and they really had no other option. So you can think of a lot of ways that this is possible. For example, things that are people who are expressing their frustration with like not being able to sign up for something, with like having to wait in the waiting list for something, things like that. So there's lots of ways that you can exploit that. If there's a very popular, not all of them are the same growth hacking, but sometimes you can even use very clever PR to say, hey, are you looking for this and that but can't sign up? This is an alternative. And all the journalists are going to jump at this because it's a very hot topic. So these are like two examples.
Nice. And I'm going to implement one of them for sure, at least. So great. But how you like stay up to date with the methods, or you invent the method by yourself, or you work with each startup and then I don't know how it works. Like, or there are some methods and it works for every startup, or how does it work?
Look, so there are lots of ways. First of all, I'm very active on LinkedIn and I get a lot of my information from there. And also, this is a benefit from working with like dozens of startups, is that every time something goes wild and like really succeeds in one place, I can take it to all the other places that I work with and, think of like similar things, not necessarily exactly the same, because one of the things that we have to remember is that at this like 0 to 1 or 0 to X stage, every startup is very, very different. You really need to find and identify a channel and an approach method that works specifically for your startup. So yeah, but it does, the idea of like brainstorming with lots of different startups on lots of different ideas. Sometimes at one startup, a cool idea will be ranked maybe number 10, but the same idea for a different startup that I work with will be number 1.
Amazing. I think you have a lot of methods. Do you have a book or something, or I don't know, a guide or list of methods, or maybe if not, it's worth, I think, to populate at least here in Israel. I think a lot of startups here will be happy to see it, at least in Israel. But yeah,
yeah, it's funny that you ask, because first of all, I kind of use like LinkedIn as my personal encyclopedia or knowledge base. Every time I do something cool, I usually post about it, or I take a Loom and I record a Loom and I share it. And also like working with, sometimes I do master classes as well, and people come up with the craziest problems there. And sometimes they challenge me like on the spot to come up with a few ideas or with a few thoughts about a new subject that I never encountered. And just by hearing about all of these different, audiences and use cases, and I think it's like it fosters a lot of creativity. And that's, besides that, the bonus is when you discuss these things with like communities of people, when you have more people to discuss it with. So yeah, Daniel, if you want yourself, I can add you to one of these communities where, you can ask, let's say I want to do this and that, or I want to reach this kind of audience, give me some ideas.
Yeah, sure. I have a FOMO. Add me immediately, okay?
Okay.
Great, but you had a very good examples from Uber and from Airbnb, and these companies are well funded. Obviously, they have a lot of money, and they can pay a lot of a lot of money for different providers. But right now, the situation in the startup world and the financially is not so simple. Can you share with us some examples of growth hacking methods, but cheaper than, from Airbnb?
Yeah, well, actually, the two examples that I told you about were back when they were like just seed stage companies, maybe raised a few hundred K from Y Combinator. So these are the tactics that I shared are actually tactics for the stage where you're kind of scrappy. When you grow more, you have to most times find more scalable methods, and then you go into like ads and like massive content creation and influencer marketing. But generally speaking, what I usually recommend to do is at the very early stages, for especially for B2B companies, is either like work with some version of like scraping, either websites or social networks or GitHub or whatever works for you, and try to do more of like a scraping and cold outreach method, because first of all, that's probably the cheapest method to do things at a relatively big scale. And also, it's almost the only method where your actions have immediate results. So at the earlier stage, I don't recommend, like, for example, investing in SEO, because that takes months to materialize. Instead, when you are able to reach out to people, they either respond or they don't. And most times, if you reach out to them with a problem that they really care about and that they really suffer from, they're gonna respond, even with like all the noise and everything. I find that reaching out to people it's like a numbers game, but at the end of the day, it does help you find, if you write good messages, good DMs, or good emails, they do help you get to the right first customers.
Amazing. Great.
Another method that sometimes works and might not be very expensive, contrary to maybe what some people think, is ads. If you find a specific niche and you're able to advertise to that particular niche, yes, it will cost you money, but also time is money, right? So when you're trying to reach out to people, you're also investing your time, which is potentially worth money. But sometimes the ads also have an immediate effect. People either click on them and fill out the form, or they don't, okay? So that's another reason why I think that those two immediate methods should be, an early stage startup's go-to tactics, because everything else takes a very long time.
I see. But do you have an example where a growth hacking method didn't work at all? Nothing? And you should suggest, or, I don't know what to do, but nothing worked for them. It's special products, very, very small target audience. Maybe they should,
Yeah, look, there are situations, I think, that mostly for B2C, it's not as easy to do the same, to take the same approach, because it's not as easy to reach out to customers. There aren't any databases of B2C customers for obvious privacy reasons, which is very different from B2B. There are still a few methods from what I said that will work in B2C. For example, if you're scraping social networks and actively responding to things, then you will be able to, in some cases get to the people. But if you're doing a consumer product, sometimes I think the best way, for example, if you're building a consumer product, is probably Kickstarter or something like that. Or, that's not the same kind of growth hacks that I specialize in. And there are people who specialize in marketing early stage hardware consumer products. So that's like a different niche, and it requires different techniques.
Amazing. It's interesting because with B2C, we're also a B2B company, but for me, a B2C, it seems or sounds, for B2B it's very hard, but for B2C, for me it sounds like impossible. But obviously yeah.
You're right. It's far less predictable than, It's also the reason why, VCs invest more in B2B, because if they make sense of what the value is, then they hope with reasonable expectation that you'll be able to find customers. Whereas with B2C, they really have to see the traction first, to see that you really got it, in order to believe you that you'll be able to execute and to sell.
Yeah. I have another question for those who, just started their startup, maybe they pre-revenue or, a few hundreds or a couple of thousands. What would you suggest? The best tip you can share, but not necessarily a growth hacking tip. You saw a lot of startups. I guess you saw some successful, some less. So my question is, you saw a lot of startups, some of them more successful, some of them less. You also, attended the Y Combinator. So give the startups that just started, that they're pre-revenue or, a few hundreds or couple of customers. What are the two main tips you can share for a successful startup? Not necessarily growth hacking tip, or why do you think?
Wow.
Why do you think will work? You saw a lot of them, so yeah.
This is a huge question, and I'll give you two answers. The first answer is that you probably, contrary to what a lot of founders are have itchy fingers and they want to start building. What I discovered is that you really want to interview customers. You really want to get to know customers and their particular problem well in advance, like well before you start writing your first line of code, well before you are, after starting Impact 11 about 9 months ago, my goal was first of all to help startups acquire their first customers and do their go-to-market, and at the same time do the validation for a few of my own product ideas. I don't know if I should be happy or sad to tell you this, but I've already done 2 rounds of validation for 2 different ideas, and these ideas I found that they didn't work out. I find that either people weren't having the problem that I thought they were having, or the problem wasn't painful enough, or maybe it was painful enough, but it wasn't painful enough for enough people. So the idea is, the first thing that I would recommend to anyone is to do more research in advance, and like to really be able to calculate in your head, what particular problem am I solving? Who am I solving it for? How much is it really worth for them? Because if you can't calculate that, they're not going to pay you. And how many different customers can I reasonably expect to acquire? And if you don't have all of these 4 things lined up with a really good understanding of what exactly you're doing, then very, very likely that you're going to fail at one of those, and failing at any one of those means you're going to back to square one. So I think that you want to know all of these things in advance. That's the first thing that I would say. Prioritize your research before the building, not after the fact, after you've built something and have a solution that's now looking for a problem. The second thing that I would recommend is that it took me probably 3 years and 3 cycles of tests and attempts to get accepted to Y Combinator and to start this company that I was able to raise money for. And when I got started, I had this idea. The first 2 times that I did not succeed as much were startups that, things that I had this idea and I worked with a couple of friends. With the first one, I actually entered a startup competition at the university where I took the MBA, and we both failed miserably. We started, the presentation wasn't good, everything it wasn't good. We failed. With the second one, maybe a year or 2 after that, I had another idea. And this time, we knew how to make the presentation better. We actually had an idea that made a lot more sense. And, after failing the first time, we kind of learned and we adjusted and we won the second place at this competition. But we still didn't succeed. This still didn't work out. And then 1 or 2 years later, when I had this third idea, I already had all the lessons from the previous 2, and when we got into Y Combinator, of course we were very happy, but it was already after, for example, that I tried to sign up for Y Combinator with a startup before and failed, but at least I had, an idea in my head of what they were asking, what they wanted to see. I already did a lot of the research. So the next one we did succeed, and interestingly, Demo Day, where you get to stand in front of 500 investors and pitch to them, was already my 3rd time standing in front of a 500 people audience and pitching my startup idea to them. I already had all the lessons from the previous, from the first failure and from the second, moderate success, and I already knew how to prepare for this event and how to, I prepared for this event probably 1,000,000 times better than I prepared for my first, and it went we crushed it. So my second advice is probably to understand that this is the same way that you're iterating with your startup, you're also iterating with yourself. So
fail more. So your suggestion is to fail more. Fail fast.
Try more. You try, you fail, you try again.
Great tips. Maybe anything else you want to add or to share from your, you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, something you want to add before we end this session?
Wow. Actually, I can't think of anything. Let me think if there's anything else that I want to add. I think that overall, from everything that I've learned so far, I just think that in general, my philosophy is kind of that everything is one big experiment, right? And what determines how fast you're going to get to, from 0 to 1 or from something that doesn't work into something that works, you just have to experiment more and experiment faster. That I think is probably the end result and the final learning from everything that I previously did. And another like really small thing is that sometimes if something doesn't work, don't try to experiment like too close to that area. If you've realized that this doesn't work, go the other way. Like if you're thinking too big, the next time think too small. If you're thinking too small, the next time think too big until you get it right? Don't like think a little bit bigger, because that's probably not going to be enough. It doesn't cover enough space in the experimentation space. So, keep experimenting, learn from your experiments, grow what works.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all the tips. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nimo. Thank you for your time. It was really, really interesting. We will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. It was fun.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Looking forward to talking. Bye.